Hey there, this is Dr. Chip Watkins. I'm a family physician, but have an interest in motivational interviewing, and specifically today we're going to be talking about brief action planning. So we're going to break this up into 3 different modules. This is the first module, so welcome, and we are so happy that you have joined us. So first thing about brief action planning is that it's based in the work of Miller and Rolnick, who came up with the idea of motivational interviewing back in the 80s. And this was actually an outgrowth of Carl Rogers' work even before that. So we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and the folks that started MI and continue with MI are no exception. But you've already had an introduction to MI and the 4 main processes. What we've talked about before has been engaging the patient, that time that you take with the patient to actually really make a connection with the patient, because you've got to start there or you really can't do anything. The next thing is then focusing in on what you both agree on that you want to work on that day. What are the things that you want to talk about, and how do you want to move ahead down the path with the patient. The third thing is evoking, which is really the meat and potatoes of MI, and that's where we actually draw out from the patient their ideas about what will motivate them, the things that they find important. It's not us imposing our agenda or our ideas upon them, it's actually drawing forth from the patient their ideas, their motivations, their desires as to what they want to get out of the program, and you work on that together. But that's a lot of work up to that point. Today we're going to be talking about more so the planning part, and we're going to be talking about a specific area called brief action planning, or BAP. So we're going to really concentrate on brief action planning today. Brief action planning is actually a very highly structured, so it's fairly prescriptive in the things that we actually teach and the way that we use it. Definitely patient-centered though, because again it is built on those foundations of MI. It's a stepped care approach, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. And it's certainly evidence-based or evidence-informed. And it's a self-management support technique that again is based on based on the foundations of motivational interviewing. So as we think about step care, we talk about step care being the same thing here in terms of helping folks change their behavior as we would about step care for diabetes or step care for hypertension. And if you'll notice here at the base, really we talk about culture and health literacy and patient activation, those sorts of things. And these really are the foundation of change and the foundation of health, because here we're talking about really the cultural things, the poverty, the education of the patient, and those sort of things. And these are really the foundation. Remember, 85% of health outcomes are actually based on things outside of the medical system. So things like poverty and education are probably most important. As we kind of move up the scale, if you will, here we're talking about actually brief action planning and goal setting and problem solving and those sorts of techniques. Above that, and you're noticing that as we go up the scale, the squares become smaller because there are less people that need to be involved at each section. So here, the advanced approaches actually include motivational interviewing. So remember that BAP is only a part of motivational interviewing. So as we move up the step here, again, motivational interviewing, care management, problem solving, therapy, and those sorts of things. At the top of the list are really the expert methods. So here we're talking about really referring somebody to a psychologist or a counselor who can help them with things like, I don't know, DBT or EMDR, the rapid eye movement therapies, and those sorts of expert techniques that we won't get into here, obviously, thankfully. So what is motivational interviewing? It really is a conversation, but it's more than that. It is actually goal-oriented, but it's a collaborative conversation that actually strengthens a person's own motivation and their commitment to change. And I like that. That's kind of the latest and greatest definition for Miller and Rolnick in the 3rd edition of motivational interviewing. I encourage you to get that, read it if you haven't had it. Another definition might be thinking about this conversation that you're having about health behavior change with your patient as in more of a dance, as opposed to maybe wrestling. Because we know that as we approach folks about change, if we start giving them all the reasons that they need to change, they have to change, that they must change, what happens? Well, they tend to butt heads with us, right? It's just human nature. If any of you have teenagers, you know this to be true, that as you absolutely impose your will harder and harder on that person, they tend to resist. And so resistance is the thing that we want to really avoid most of all in this conversation about health behavior change. So it really is a dance. Remember the Karate Kid, right? So kind of the wax on, wax off here is what we're talking about. All right, so I had mentioned the 3rd edition of Motivational Interviewing by Miller and Rolnick. Again, I would encourage you all to get that, purchase that, and put that in your library and read it before you put it in your library. But we know that in terms of health behavior change, we know that patients have better outcomes when we are really taking seriously this spirit of MI. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about that as we move on. And then the other thing is something that we call in MI called change talk. When you start hearing people's desires for change and their ability to change, whether they think they can change, those sorts of things, their reasons for change, and maybe even their needs for change. I really need to lose weight because I want to run with my grandchildren, or whatever their particular reasons that you're hearing, that the more that you hear about change talk and the patient being willing and desirous of change, that's what you really want to key in on. And the more of that you hear, the greater the chance that the person's going to change. All right? So lack of outcomes are actually associated, we know of, and there are probably about 700 studies now with MI that are in the literature, but it's poor fidelity to MI. People haven't either learned the techniques as well, or most likely that spirit of MI is missing. To where they're actually just using techniques and the spirit is not there, and that's not very helpful either. A mismatch between skills that are needed and where the patient is. You know, ever finish with a preposition? I'm just saying. So wherever the patient is where we need to be, and we need to match that up, and we need to, because this is a collaborative conversation, right? And then inflexible approaches, you know, you will do it this way, and this is the only way we can do it. So that's got to be out. We've got to be able to be fluid and remember the dance. We want to move with the patient as they go through this conversation with us. So, as we talk about spirit of MI, we talk about compassion, acceptance, partnership, and evocation. We're a cape, right? So never go anywhere without your cape. Compassion, being there with the patient. I can't remember if there's a picture here. There's not. So being with the patient, and this is really doing this with heart, right? You're meeting the patient where they are and being with them in a safe space. Acceptance doesn't necessarily mean approval. Acceptance means that you're hearing them, you understand them, and that you accept their autonomy in that situation. So it does not necessarily mean that you approve, right? So the third thing is partnership. And again, this is a true collaboration, not expert novice, not student teacher. That would be teacher student, or Lord forbid, parent child. You don't want any of those relationships like that with your patients. We want to have this be much more collaborative. Evocation, we talked about being the meat and potatoes of MI. This is where we are actually drawing out from the patient their ideas, motivations, needs, desires, and so forth, as to why they would want to change. So, I would ask you, what's wrong with this picture? All right? So, does this guy have the spirit of MI? This is what we're asking. Does he have acceptance? Yeah, he has acceptance. He accepts that you can walk off the car lot anytime you feel like it. So he's got to accept you in that way and understand that you're autonomous and that you have the ability to walk off the lot. Will he start a partnership with you? Absolutely, he certainly can. Sometimes at the end of the negotiations, partnership with the manager, but he'll work with you and find out what your needs are, and that's where the evocation comes in, right? He'll actually, if he's a good salesman, will ask you lots of questions and find out really what it is that you're desirous of and what you can do in terms of abilities to pay and all that, what your needs are and what you really want and all those things. So what's missing? Right? So what's missing here is compassion, right? And without compassion, without that spirit of MI, without that heart, this can be a very manipulative situation. And we don't, MI is not about Jedi mind tricks, right? It's not about, these are not the droids that you're looking for, right? So it's really more about being with that patient in a safe space and the compassion we're talking about, right? So when we're talking about your CAPE, your compassion, acceptance, partnership, and evocation, this is really a sign of respect. It can be thought of as almost a protection. Again, this safe space that you are both creating that the patient feels they can be honest with you about. And that's the place where you have to start for really working on change, right? And again, not really the tricks or techniques, but more so you are working through a process with the patient, and they're the expert on themselves. You may have some really great expert information. I mean, you went to school for however many years, but that needs to be tempered with the fact that the patient is also an expert. So again, we're on themselves. So we're actually coming at this, and again, as a collaboration, right? So the compassion, again, is actively promoting the other's welfare. That's the heart of compassion. And really giving priority to their needs. It's about their agenda. It's about their needs. It's not about our needs. It's not about our agenda. That's the idea of compassion. Acceptance, again, we talk about accurate empathy. So empathy really has to do with being there with the patient wherever it is they are, and coming from that, again, spirit, heart. Affirmation, you can find something to affirm about every patient. Not long ago I saw a lady who was actually selling herself. Why? To provide food for her family, provide milk for her kids. That's something you can affirm, right? Even though you may not agree with the way she does it, it's in it, you accept what she's doing as something that's very powerful, and you can affirm that in it, right? Every person has absolute worth, and you got to believe this, right? Sometimes our patients try us in this area, but there's no doubt about it. Patients have absolute worth. And then it's really all about supporting their autonomy. At the end of the day, even a suicidal patient has the autonomy to make that decision. You have to believe that that patient has the power, the ability to carry out their desires. And you know what? End of the day, that's what they're going to do anyway. So the best thing that we can do as practitioners is actually to sit with them, understand where they're coming from, and then this is more of a guiding way of being with people as opposed to really a directing way of being with people. I remember my daughter, when we were going into the ocean for the first time, right? Put your little toes in the ocean. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, right. So, as a dad, what are my options? My options, one might be to be behind her and take my hands and push her into the ocean, right? How did that work? Yeah, not so good usually. Usually a lot of crying involved there and consoling and so forth. Not that I've done it. The other option I would have would be to go around in front of her, take her by the hands, and pull her into the ocean, right? Again, how's that work? Yeah, not so good, right? A lot more crying, a lot more consoling. Not that I've ever done either of those things. So the best option that I have is actually to come alongside her, put my arm around her, and together we walk into the ocean, right? So that is actually where we're going with really supporting someone, being with them through this in a way that's meaningful and helpful for them. Again, the partnership between experts. They're an expert on them. You have a good bit of expertise in the area that you know and have had a lot of training in. Again, not teacher-student, not parent-child. Expert. So we really want to build that partnership and build that active collaboration. Evocation is, again, pulling forth from the patient their strengths, their resources for change. And that's really the heart of MI, and I would encourage you to take at least a 2, 3, 4, 5 day course over a period of time to really understand where we're coming from in terms of MI. That's just something that's needed. If you listen to this and you go, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, I've got to do this. Do it, please. And then so I just would like you to think, maybe what are some ways that you've seen the spirit of MI in your work this week? Have you had some, if you remember from your earlier training, the ORs, right? The open-ended questions and affirmations and reflections and summaries, right? So have you had a chance to use those things? Have you worked with patients in that way? Have you shown compassion? Have you been a partner and a collaborator with your patients? Have you evoked from them their ideas, their motivations, and those sorts of things? So I would just give you a little bit of time to reflect on that. We are not going to do this video at this point, but hopefully we'll tag it on, and this is where you can find this great video that the Cleveland Clinic did. So that, my friends, is the end of our first installment of BAP. Just giving you that foundation again, kind of reminding you where you've been in terms of MI, where we hope that you'll want to go as you move down the path. And then this next section will actually be really getting into BAP and helping you do a much better job of efficient planning. So thank you for your attention, and we'll talk to you soon.